The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic one final time. At 42 years old, he had stood guard at the palace gates for nearly 15 years, his face a mask of stoic professionalism that had become second nature. The tourists would come and go, cameras flashing, children waving, but Thomas remained motionless, a living statue in service to the crown. This particular Tuesday seemed no different from any other. The changing of the guard ceremony had concluded, without incident, and Thomas had taken his position at the main entrance. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly straight. His polished boots reflected the morning light, and his rifle was held at the precise angle drilled into him during countless hours of training. But something felt different today. Perhaps it was the way the elderly woman had been standing across the street for the past hour, clutching a faded photograph to her chest. She wasn't like the usual tourists who snapped quick pictures and moved on. This woman, probably in her 70s, with silver hair neatly pinned back and wearing a simple navy coat, seemed to be gathering courage for something. Thomas had noticed her from the corner of his eye, though his training demanded he keep his gaze fixed straight ahead. She had approached the gate several times, only to step back into the crowd. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she held what appeared to be an old military photograph, and there was something in her posture that spoke of deep, unresolved grief. The woman's name was Margaret Thornton, though Thomas didn't know this yet. She had traveled from her small cottage in Yorkshire, a journey that had taken her 3 hours by train and another hour navigating the busy London streets. The photograph she carried showed a young man in military uniform, his smile bright and full of hope. This was her grandson, Private James Thornton, who had served with distinction in Afghanistan before making the ultimate sacrifice for his country. Margaret had been planning this visit for months, ever since she had learned about a tradition she'd heard whispered among other military families. It was said that the royal guards, despite their stern exterior, understood the weight of loss that military families carried. Some families had found comfort in small gestures of remembrance near the palace, where symbols of service and duty stood strong. As the morning progressed, Margaret finally summoned the courage to approach the gate. Her steps were slow but determined, each one carrying the weight of 2 years of grief that had barely begun to heal. She had lost her only grandson, the boy she had helped raise after his parents died in a car accident when he was just 12. James had been her world, her pride, and her reason for getting up each morning. The other tourists seemed to sense something solemn about her approach and unconsciously stepped aside, creating a path between Margaret and the imposing figure of Sergeant Mitchell. The morning chatter quieted as people noticed the elderly woman's purposeful movement toward the guard post. Margaret stopped just a few feet from Thomas, close enough that he could see her reflection in his peripheral vision. She stood there, silently for several moments, as if finding the right words for what she needed to say. The photograph in her hands was worn from countless viewings, its edges soft from being held during long nights of remembrance. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for Thomas to hear, Margaret began to speak. Her words were simple, but carried the weight of a grandmother's love and loss that would soon touch the heart of a man trained never to show emotion. "Excuse me, young man," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying a Yorkshire accent that reminded Thomas of his own grandmother. "I know you can't respond, and I don't expect you to, but I needed to come here today, to this place that represents everything my James died protecting." She held up the photograph, angling it so Thomas could see it clearly without moving his eyes. The young soldier in the picture had the same gentle eyes as the woman standing before him, and Thomas felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't expected. "This is my grandson, Private James Thornton. He was 23 when he died in Helmand Province. A roadside bomb took him and 3 of his mates while they were delivering medical supplies to a village school." Margaret's voice remained steady, though Thomas could detect the tremor of emotion beneath her composed exterior. The crowd around them had grown quieter. Some tourists, realizing they were witnessing something profound, a few stepped closer, their phones lowered out of respect for the moment unfolding before them. Margaret continued, James always said he wanted to serve something bigger than himself. When he was little, we'd come to London, and he'd watch the guards just like this. He'd stand perfectly still, trying to copy you, saying he wanted to be brave like the soldiers who protected the Queen. Thomas felt his throat tighten. In his 15 years of service, he had received countless compliments and endured numerous distractions, but nothing had prepared him for this. The woman's words were reaching past his professional armor, touching something deeply personal. "Wrote to me from Afghanistan," Margaret went on, pulling a worn letter from her coat pocket. He said that whenever he felt scared or homesick, he would think about the guards back home, standing strong no matter what. He said it reminded him that some things were worth protecting, worth sacrificing for. The letter in Margaret's hand was clearly well read, its paper soft from being folded and unfolded countless times. Thomas could see her hands shaking slightly as she held it, and he found himself fighting every instinct that told him to reach out and comfort this grieving woman. "I brought something for you," Margaret said, reaching into her other pocket. She pulled out a small poppy pin, the kind worn to remember fallen soldiers. "James would have wanted me to give this to someone who understands duty the way he did." She stepped forward and with infinite care placed the poppy pin at the base of the guard post where Thomas stood. The simple gesture was loaded with meaning. A grandmother's love, a nation's gratitude, and a bridge between those who serve and those who remember. "I don't need you to say anything," Margaret whispered. "I just needed you to know that what you do matters. That standing here protecting what James died for, it means everything to families like mine." Thomas felt his composure beginning to crack. His training screamed at him to maintain his stoic expression, to remain the unmovable guardian he was supposed to be. But Margaret's words were breaking down barriers he had built over years of service. The memories came flooding back to Thomas as Margaret's words settled over him like a gentle but powerful wave. He thought of his own military service before joining the Guard, the friends he had lost in distant conflicts, the letters he had written to families who would never see their loved ones return home. Margaret wasn't finished. She looked directly at Thomas, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her voice growing stronger. "James used to say that heroes weren't just the ones who charged into battle. He said heroes were also the ones who stood watch, who kept the peace, who showed the world that some values never bend or break." A small crowd had gathered now, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Among them was Sarah Chen, a young mother with her 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah had brought Emma to see the guards as a treat. Both found themselves captivated by the elderly woman's tribute. "Mommy, why is the lady crying?" Emma whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "She's remembering someone very special," Sarah replied quietly, pulling Emma closer. Margaret heard the child's question and turned slightly, offering Emma a watery smile. "I'm telling this brave soldier about my grandson, sweetheart. He was a soldier too, and he was very, very brave." Emma nodded solemnly, her young mind trying to process the weight of the moment. She had never seen an adult cry while smiling before, and something about the woman's sadness felt important. Even if she couldn't fully understand it, Thomas was fighting an internal battle unlike any he had ever experienced. His military training, his years of discipline, everything he had been taught about maintaining composure was warring against the very human response Margaret's story was evoking. He could feel moisture gathering in his eyes, and his breathing had become slightly irregular. Margaret noticed the subtle changes in Thomas's demeanor. After raising a grandson and living through decades of life's joys and sorrows, she had developed an instinct for reading people's emotions even when they tried to hide them. "I know you can't speak to me," she said gently, "but I want you to know that I see you. Not just the uniform, not just the ceremony, but the man underneath. The man who chooses to serve day after day, even when no one thanks him for it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a second item, a small card with James's regimental badge printed on it. This was from James's funeral. The chaplain gave these 2 family members. "I've been carrying it for 2 years, not knowing what to do with it, but seeing you here today, I think James would want you to have it." Margaret placed the card next to the poppy pin at the base of the guard post. The simple memorial was growing, each item a token of respect and remembrance that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. He believed in something bigger than himself. Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. And so do you. Every day you stand here, you honor that belief. You honor him. Thomas felt a tear slide down his cheek, hidden beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat, but impossible. To stop the professional mask he had worn for so many years was cracking, revealing the deeply moved human being beneath. The moment stretched between them, grandmother and guardian, connected by threads of service, sacrifice, and shared understanding. Thomas's hands, steady for so many years, began to tremble almost imperceptibly around his rifle. The weight of Margaret's tribute was settling into his heart, and he found himself remembering why he had chosen this path of service in the first place. Margaret wasn't done sharing. She looked at the photograph one more time before speaking again. Was supposed to come home for Christmas 2 years ago. I had his room ready, his favorite meal planned. Instead, I got a knock on my door and 2 officers with news that changed everything. Her voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. The hardest part wasn't losing him. The hardest part was thinking that his sacrifice might be forgotten, that in a few years, no one would remember Private James Thornton or what he stood for. Little Emma, still watching from her mother's arms, suddenly broke free and walked toward Margaret. The child's innocence cut through the heavy emotion of the moment as she approached the elderly woman. "My daddy says soldiers are heroes," Emma said in her clear, childish voice. "Was your grandson a hero?" Margaret knelt down to Emma's level, her face lighting up despite her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, he was the biggest hero I ever knew. Not because he wasn't scared, but because he was brave, even when he was frightened." Thomas watched this exchange, and something fundamental shifted inside him. Here was a child learning about courage and sacrifice, a grandmother teaching the next generation about honor and remembrance. This was why he stood guard, why any of them served to protect moments like this, to ensure that values like courage and sacrifice could be passed down. "Can I help remember him too?" Emma asked, her young voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. Margaret's composure finally broke completely. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she nodded. "That would mean the world to me and to James." Emma reached into her small backpack and pulled out a drawing she had made that morning, a crude but heartfelt picture of a soldier standing tall with a crown above his head. She had drawn it to show her teacher when she got back to school, but something told her it belonged here now. "This is for James," Emma said, carefully placing her drawing next to the other items at the guard post. The crowd that had gathered was completely silent now, everyone understanding they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. Several people had tears in their eyes, and a few had their hands over their hearts. Thomas felt his chest heaving with suppressed emotion. The combination of Margaret's story, the child's innocent generosity, and the weight of his own memories was creating a perfect storm of feeling that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. Margaret stood slowly on her knees, protesting the movement, and looked directly at Thomas one final time. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Thank you for standing watch over all of us. James would be honored to know that men like you carry on the tradition he died protecting." She turned to leave, but then paused and faced Thomas again. In a voice that carried across the courtyard, she said words that would echo in Thomas's mind for years to come. "Stand tall, soldier. You're not just guarding a building or a tradition. You're guarding the hopes and dreams of everyone who believes in something greater than themselves." Thomas's carefully constructed emotional barriers finally crumbled completely. A single tear escaped from beneath his bearskin hat, rolling down his weathered cheek and disappearing into his red tunic. Then another followed and another, until the stoic guard was quietly weeping while maintaining his rigid posture. The crowd watched in stunned silence as this symbol of unwavering strength showed his humanity. Some visitors began to cry themselves, moved by the raw emotion of the moment. Others bowed their heads in respect, understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Margaret saw the tears and felt her heart swell with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She had come here hoping to honor James's memory, but she had found something unexpected, a human connection that transcended duty and protocol. She reached into her purse one final time and pulled out a small British flag that had been draped over James's coffin. "This is from his funeral," she said, her voice strong despite her own tears. "The chaplain gave it to me, but I think it belongs here, with someone who understands what it really means." She carefully placed the folded flag at Thomas's feet, arranging it next to the poppy pin, the regimental card, and Emma's drawing. The small memorial had become something powerful, a testament to service, sacrifice, and remembrance. Young Emma, still standing near Margaret, suddenly saluted Thomas with her small hand. It was a clumsy, childish salute, but it carried more meaning than any formal military ceremony. The innocence and respect in her gesture sent another wave of emotion through the watching crowd. Thomas's shoulders shook almost imperceptibly as he struggled to maintain his position while honoring this tribute. In all his years of service, through ceremonies and parades, state visits and public events, nothing had moved him like this simple act of remembrance from a grieving grandmother and an innocent child. Other people in the crowd began to approach. Quietly, an older man, clearly a veteran himself based on his bearing and the military pins on his jacket lapel, stepped forward and placed his own poppy pin beside Margaret's tribute. A young woman added a small British flag keychain. A teenager left a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for your service." What had started as one woman's private moment of grief was becoming a spontaneous memorial, a community acknowledgement of sacrifice and service. The items at Thomas's feet grew into a small but meaningful collection of gratitude and remembrance. Margaret watched this unfold with wonder. She had come to London feeling alone in her grief, carrying the weight of James's memory by herself, but now she saw that others understood that the values her grandson had died for were alive in the hearts of strangers who had never known his name. "James would love this," she whispered to Thomas. "He always believed that service connects us, all that we're stronger when we remember those who came before us." The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the courtyard and casting the impromptu memorial in a golden light. Thomas stood taller, if that was possible, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor in a way he never had before. As Margaret prepared to leave, she did something unexpected that would become the most powerful moment of the entire encounter. She stepped back from the memorial she had created, and despite her age and the arthritis that made movement painful, she stood at attention and saluted Thomas. It wasn't a perfect military salute. Her hand shook with age and emotion, but it was filled with more respect and sincerity than any formal ceremony could ever contain. She held the salute for several long seconds, her eyes locked on Thomas's face, conveying everything she couldn't put into words. The effect on Thomas was immediate and overwhelming. This grandmother, who owed him nothing, who had lost everything that mattered most to her, was saluting him. She was honoring his service in the same way she would have honored her fallen grandson. The parallel was too powerful to bear with composure. Thomas's tears flowed freely now, visible to everyone in the courtyard. His professional mask had completely disappeared, replaced by raw, honest emotion that spoke to everyone present. It was no longer just a ceremonial guard. He was a human being. Moved beyond words by an act of profound grace, the crowd burst into spontaneous applause. But it wasn't the tourist applause that Thomas was used to hearing. This was different, deeper, more respectful, filled with understanding of what they had just witnessed. People were crying openly. Moved by the connection between the grieving grandmother and the emotional guard, Margaret lowered her salute and walked over to little Emma, who was still standing nearby with her mother. "Thank you for your drawing, sweetheart," she said, hugging the child gently. "James would have loved it." Emma hugged her back fiercely. "I'll remember James," she promised in her small voice. "I'll tell my friends about him." Margaret then turned to the crowd that had gathered. "This is what my grandson died for," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Not for politics or territory, but for moments like this. For the right to gather freely, to honor our fallen, to raise our children in a place where kindness still matters." As Margaret finally turned to leave, she paused one last time in front of Thomas. "Stand proud, soldier," she said. "You carry all of us with you when you stand guard." James, me, all the families who have lost someone in service, you're not alone in your duty. She walked away slowly, her mission complete, leaving behind a changed man in a courtyard full of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. Thomas continued to cry quietly as he maintained his post, but there was something different about his bearing now. He stood taller, prouder, carrying the weight of Margaret's tribute and the memory of Private James Thornton. The small memorial at his feet remained throughout his shift, a reminder that behind every uniform is a human story, and that the greatest honors often come not from ceremonies or medals, but from the simple recognition of one person's service by another's grateful heart. When Thomas's replacement arrived, for the next shift, the new guard found the memorial and quietly maintained it, understanding without explanation that something important had happened here. The tradition would continue, the watch would be kept, and the memory of Private James Thornton would live on in the heart of a royal guard who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing yourself to feel.